Hi, everyone, and welcome to Berklee's Guitar Department Stylistic Diversity Series. And I'm here with Kim Perlak, who is the chair of Berklee's Guitar Department, and some of our esteemed faculty that I'll ask Kim to introduce. So over to you, Kim.
Thanks, Damien. Hey, everybody, I'm Kim Perlak. I'm the chair of the guitar department. And welcome to our second in our series on stylistic diversity. Um, we're here with Damien Bracken, who's the Dean of Admissions. So, hey, Damien, thanks for having us. We're with Ian Steed, our department coordinator. Hey, Ian.
Hey all, how you doing?
Um,
I
Abby Aronson, who is a professor of guitar. Hey, Abby.
Hi. Thanks for having
And you're welcome. Thanks for being here. And David Gilmore, professor of guitar. Hey, David.
Hey,
Hey, thanks for being here. So, part of having this series is to bring together faculty members from really different stylistic backgrounds and have you talk about some of the things that you have in common, some of the things that you think are important for students to know. And then we have some students listening in real time, and they're going to have some questions for you as well. A lot of these people are folks who are thinking of coming here to Berklee and want to know what to expect. And so I just want to start off by saying that I think one of the cool things that the two of you have in common, if you haven't listened to Abby and David, you really should go out and do that. So we're going to give you some ways to do that. We have a YouTube page that has a lot of recordings on there. We're going to put both of you on there featured, as well as on our Instagram and Facebook. You can find us on all social media under Berklee Guitar Department. And you can also hang with us and have a cup of coffee with each of these two great faculty members on our Coffee Talk series, which is like a podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So you'll be able to go pretty deep with them, and you'll hear how unique they are in their styles. But one thing they have in common that's really cool is they've both played with a lot of other people, found their own sounds, playing with other people, and empowered people to find their own sounds. So David is one of the most versatile, like, sideman, I guess, for the lack of a better word, playing other people's music, playing from Wayne Shorter to pop acts like Joss Stone, all the way across the board, and has found his ability to find his own sound that way. Abby does this in her group called Abby and Norm Group, and then also, Abby, you have helped many people find their own sound in different styles, like everybody from St. Vincent to the folks in Big Thief, that group, and Molly Tuttle, and many people have taken your labs and ensembles. So I think that might be a nice place to start. And so the first question, David, can you talk a little bit, like just, I guess, try to keep your answer kind of brief, and we'll keep coming back around to it. But can you talk a little bit about the way you worked on your musicianship to become a player that wants to play with other people and is great at it? Did you always want to play with others?
um, yeah, I guess it was kind of, I don't know, more an unconscious thing in that I just grew up, I grew up in the Boston area, and, 70s radio was a lot more diverse. When you turned up on WRKO AM radio, they had all kinds of stuff across the spectrum from, I mean, it was mostly a rock radio, but then, I'd go to WILD and I'd hear R&B, and, that coupled with my parents' record collection that had classical, had jazz, it had James Brown in there. There's all kinds of stuff. I was just bombarded by so many different influences, and so I couldn't help but be affected by that growing up. So it wasn't really a conscious decision. At first, I liked all different styles of music, and so as I got more into figuring out what I wanted to do musically, it just sort of, I guess I fell more into the jazz camp after a while. I became a jazz nerd in high school, and my teacher, John Baboyan, who's teaching here still, he basically got me into jazz. He taught music through jazz standards. So that was my introduction to that. And Miles Davis was coming back at that time, so I heard Mike Stern on the radio. You know, I can remember the moment that happened. I heard this rock guitar on, you know, playing with Miles Davis. And then I went back to my parents' record collection and I discovered, oh, that's the same Miles Davis that played with Charlie Parker. So all these, you know, pieces of the puzzle kind of came together. And then, you know, fast forward, I moved to New York. And I think my built-in eclectic tastes kind of melded with other people's eclectic. I just sort of was drawn to those kind of artists. And yet at the same time, I found myself, you know, still playing funk music while honing my skills playing jazz and other styles. So it just, I always kept my foot in, you know, the sort of the pop, popular music and the jazz thing at the same time. So I never jumped away from funk and R&B and rock music.
As a follow-up to that, do you have a sense of what some people might want to work on or think about if they want to be the person everybody calls? Because I think it's fair to say that you're a first call person. Everybody calls you, and they call you across a bunch of different styles. So do you have a sense of what they're responding to in your playing or in the way that you are professionally?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things are, you know, obviously to be able to have the right, you know, just you know, have the right tools, basically. You know, I don't want to bring an ES-175 to a pop gig, right? I'm going to have my Strat. So you have to have the right tools for the job. And then, you know, along with that comes, are you able to play those in a convincing way and to get the sound that you need out of those instruments? So, and that goes from anywhere from, you know, the right pick. You don't do a thick pick when you're playing funk and you're strumming. You know, there's so many things that go into it on a technical level. On a personality level, I believe, you know, you have to be open and not come in with the ego and try to say, hey, you know, especially well, with any situation really, you know, it's you really just have to, as a sideman, you're a sideman, and you know, you're there to execute other people's music. You know, with jazz, it's a little different. You know, I'm usually called for, you know, because they know what I do on pop. I haven't done as much pop music, but I'm not as much of a name in pop music, so it's sort of a different thing, you know. But yeah, you have to bring the technical equipment, and then there's different playing styles that go along with each style, yeah, and you have to learn that, you know. Yeah.
So Abby, those people who really know you're playing know that you have really studied deeply in classical music and then jazz, and now you're bringing it together into styles that are more pop related. And how did you come to that? Was that something that you always did?
It was, well, I mean, I played classical violin from age 5, but then, you know, the teens happened. And at 13, you know, there was the Grateful Dead and, you know, my poor parents, and a guitar was bought, and that's what happened. So right from the beginning, there was the whole singer-songwriter element. But my dad and mom very quickly got me to, you know, a classical program at Tanglewood. And it helped for a while. It really did. And but now you can see, you know, it's like wearing your retainer, you know. I wasn't wearing it for a while, and but it's the most wonderful thing ever, because now I feel like all the threads personally for me in my life have kind of come together and are working together in a great way. So
So similarly to David, I think you both are in styles in jazz and classical music that to some people can seem closed off, right? They can seem like their own thing. And there are a lot of people in both styles that don't have this sort of, they're not known for being super open, but you both are. And Abby, could you talk about that for a minute? And can you talk about how that helps you see in someone who's going to be a player like Adrienne from Big Thief, or someone like St. Vincent or Mali. How does all of this translate for you in the way that you're able to sort of serve their music while you're helping them deepen?
Just from the perspective of a classically trained person, a lot of the pedagogical and musical kind of practice processes and listening processes really, really translate beautifully. I know some of them don't. For instance, swing feel. But there are some things that are very style specific. But in terms of ensemble playing, in terms of the groove, there's a certain kind of groove and feel that the classical tradition I found very helpful for ensemble coaching. Um, there's tone elements. There's a lot of real kind of overarching things that are listened to carefully in classical music that I think once someone also really has studied and appreciates other kinds of music, they link together beautifully. Um, like, for instance, the element of groove not just being kind of like a train track that everybody hops on side by side, parallel play, but rather being something that, like with a string quartet, can even be created interactively. The groove, the rhythmic sense. And I found sometimes people coming to the ensemble, that's a great thing to work on with them, like a drummer who's just kind of used to jumping in and playing, and the groove happens and everybody just joins on, as opposed to everyone really listening and kind of building it together more like a piece of chamber music. And that's an interesting perspective that isn't necessarily always the one that gets studied and worked on here. And in terms of individual players, the people you mentioned, they all were exactly what they are at the beginning. It just they grew it and they developed it, and I think I know I've used this metaphor before in the other podcast, but it always struck me as those people that train lion cubs, or not train, but raise lion cubs, and they're really big at first, the trainer, and the lion cub's really little, and the lion cub can make use of many things that the person can offer. Whereas then, a couple of years down the line, they reunite the trainer and the lion cub, who's now this like huge presence, beautiful, fully realized person, or well, lion, doing all of these things in their lionness that was really always there all along. But I think there is a value when people are developing and being heard by other people, and playing with other people and hearing themselves and wondering, what am I doing? I think there's a value to being seen and by someone who's listening. Seen by someone who's listening. Listened to by someone who's seeing, and seen by someone who's, so to be. I'm getting myself into a thing here, but you get what I mean. It's really listening. So I try to listen and I try to see, and I think then you have opportunities to offer people really, really wonderful young artists things that they, like I used to say, Adrienne, you could give her something. There was this story about bees that, well, there was this apiary, and the bees started, all of a sudden the honey started ending up being like really bright colors. And they were like, what is going on here? Like they had blue honey and pink honey and all this stuff. And then they found out that there was an M&M factory near the apiary. Excuse me. And it always struck me like that, like giving Adrienne, if she was working on Bob Dylan, or, you could hear it, but it was definitely her, Um, and I wasn't the one who turned her on to Bob Dylan, but just that example struck me, is that you can hear these influences, that if you can offer these young people things that maybe they haven't heard before, haven't really thought about a lot before, then they study them and they internalize them, and wonderful things come out as a result of that in their own work. They're you know so it's nice to be able to offer them things that they have, like offering singer-songwriters. Most of them haven't listened to classical lieder.
Right.
And it's just mind-blowing. Of course, you get Sting, he's doing his whole John Dowland thing, which is wonderful. But you've got a singer-songwriter who is incredibly popular back in Shakespeare's time, and he's one of us.
Right.
So it's neat to be able to show people these things and have it resonate with them.
That's great. I like that. David, I think a lot of people who are coming to Berklee are hoping that one day they'll be out and they'll be able to play with other people, but they'll also be able to be leaders of their own work. And you are a band leader as well of your own projects. And could you talk a little bit about maybe the different mindset or different approach you take when you're in either of those two roles?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, as Abby was talking, like fearlessness is really, really important. And when we talk about styles, there is such a pull to play a certain way, especially when you're studying, which is great. You need to study different styles and different the history, you know, uh, and chronology of whatever style you're dealing with in jazz and funk music. Um, but at some point, those things are going to coalesce into something. You're going to start hearing things, And I've had students who've been afraid to, they're hearing something, but they're afraid to do it because they feel like, well, that's not right. I shouldn't stomp on a distortion box while I'm playing jazz standards, for example. Even though it's been done already many times. And, John Scofield and Mike Stern and these guys have long proven that you're allowed to do that. It's okay. You can rock out and jazz out at the same time. And so, but you have to have a certain level of fearlessness when it comes to creating something of your own. So as a leader, that definitely is more of comes more into play, because ideally you're probably composing music and putting that out there, and you just have to have this sense of, it may not be perfect, it may not be up to your standards, but it's an evolutionary process, and it's not something you can say, okay, I'm fully realized now, this is what I'm going to present, and I suffered from that for a long time. I didn't put out, a solo project for a long time because I was sort of like, do this, do that. At a certain point, you got to just say, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm going to do, and just throw it out there and know that it's not going to be up to your, perfection standards. But the only way to get there is through the process. You can't just wait one day and then, and that's it. Having said that, I also feel there's people who are doing stuff too early at the same time, and there's a lot of artists out there, there's they're pushing artists really, really, really young who aren't quite ready. So, only you can tell. So you just have to really be your own critic and just feel like nothing should be forced. This is music. We should have fun doing what we do. It's a creative process, and being creative beings, it can be frustrating and rewarding at the same time. So we just really have to me, it's just a life lesson of not being hard on yourself, and just really, as a leader, just have faith, have strength, and confidence, and know that you're going to make mistakes, And as a sideman, of course, it's the same thing. It's a learning process. I learned a lot when I graduated from NYU. I learned more on the bandstand than I could have learned in school, in ensembles, and also about the business and all that stuff. So, and it was, some very embarrassing moments. I remember bringing some charts in, and they were not written quite correctly in certain spots, and I got, shamed in rehearsal, but in a very, loving kind of way, tough love kind of situation, from fellow musicians. But it made me correct things a lot more quickly, So, you have to go in there with certain humility, whether it's a sideman, whether it's a leader, and put yourself out there. It is, as a leader, it is definitely maybe a little more daunting, because there's more pressure on you, uh, and it's such a, it can be such a competitive industry, and the expectations for you to do something are high, and but only, again, it's like you have to be self-reflective. Is that what you really want to do, or is that what society and people and your colleagues are telling you? You got to do your own thing, man. You got to do your own thing. Well, maybe you're not ready for it, So, it's just really, I look at it as, you just have to just not be too hard on yourself, and but at the same time, if you have that drive and that desire to be a leader, at a certain point, you just have to, make a leap to that, in that direction, knowing that it's a process that's going to unfold over time.
David, when you work on all of these projects, clearly there's a time factor. There's a time
Mhm.
situation. And when you're looking and working with students who want to be able to do similar things, what are the fundamentals of like fretboard knowledge and practicing and musicianship and technique, or however you think of it? What are fundamental things that you think cross all the stylistic, like what becomes your core in your mind?
Um, oh wow. I mean, modes, scales, all of that, all that we study here, arpeggios, all those things are, applicable across all styles of music. And obviously some modes, like, are used more in jazz, like melodic minor, than say some pop music. But if you're getting into R&B and gospel and things like that, which borrows from jazz harmony, then you got to know that stuff. Um, so, all the basic fretboard harmony knowledge and is applicable across the board. And I think everyone owes them. Whenever I have a student here that, I usually teach from a jazz perspective and teach standards as a vehicle to teach all of these techniques and theory and everything. And a lot of times, I know my student's not really a jazz person, Um, but I just tell them, look, if you can play this, you can play anything, Not necessarily stylistically, but at least in terms of knowledge. If they see a major 7 sharp 5, one day, they're not going to freak out, They're going to know what it is, right? So I just implore them to, stretch their boundaries a little bit. Don't say, oh, I'm never going to use this, so I'm not going to learn it. Just, learn it. You have the opportunity, the resources, and, you never know when that comes across, one day,
Um, Abby, what about you? I think maybe go backwards. Like, what's your core in terms of what you really believe is essential that crosses boundaries for you?
Um, I think things that have to do with ensemble skills, like we were talking about, ensemble playing and ensemble listening, but also phrasing and a lot of kind of musical expression. People and I love, David, what you were saying about the style. When people come in and they're really just thinking, well, I'm not going to do this because it's in a certain style and this is not the style I'm interested in. But there are concepts in every style, when it's done well, that are bigger than the style. And uh, it reminds me of kids that think they're only going to learn from other kids that are exactly their same age, as opposed to learning from a little child that they have to play with one day, or a older person who's doing a task that they watch them doing and who talks with them. These big things really make you a richer player in person. But in terms of phrasing, the overarching concepts, when people are playing, say, fingerstyle stuff, which has a lot of voices, and that's something we're doing in the repertoire and performance class with Berta Rojas, talking about how lute was really an important part of the development of polyphony, and also all the guitar players' right hand technique. We went from single line, thumb under, and then the wrist started to bend, and we had more fingers to deal with. Anyway, so we have more lines, but a lot of these guitar players in any style are doing interesting contrapuntal lines, many voices within their guitar part, whether it's an accompaniment part or a solo guitar thing. And when they listen, say, for instance, to the voices separately, it's really clear they love their own compositions even more, or the compositions they're playing. You can actually think about, the bass line has its own personality and it has its own melody, and there's lines in the middle, and there's like we were just listening in rep class, there's a spot where there's a minor second in two of the voices, and you can hear how they come together and then how they leave if you know both of them. And it's really easy to kind of know it, but not to really be able to go in and play or sing each line separately and really hear that. And once you do that, you really play it in a very different way, and you interpret it in a different way. Just as if I was talking with a certain tone of voice, like if I was talking about this now and you weren't really sure if I meant it or cared about it, because I was just kind of talking about it, and but I was saying the same words and lines, but there wasn't really a whole lot of engagement or meaning in the phrases, as opposed to if I said it and I really not overacted it in a fake way, but tried to put real meaning that I really felt into the feel of how I'm expressing the words I'm saying. You can do that with a phrase too. In fact, the phrases are often the same shapes as verbal phrases.
That leads me to the question I wanted to ask both of you, and maybe Abby first, is about sound development. So many people say, like, I have this dream to develop my own sound, and so much about developing your tone is working on your physical hands. Like David was saying, even just the idea of what pick you use, or, for us as fingerstyle people, what do you use, nails, and understanding your amplifiers and how they work. And I wanted to introduce this by saying that we all played a faculty concert a couple weeks ago, and Ian and Cheryl and I are going to get that up on YouTube soon, so you can hear it if you weren't able to catch the live stream. But in the sound check, we were sound checking the nylon string guitars first, and there was a whole situation with the amps. With this one guitar that Abby was playing was so bright, and it really took like, okay, calm down. We're going to find out how to, because your sound was beautiful, but then the amp wasn't helping. So we had to go and really get in there. And then the other thing I noticed on David's end is he was playing with Cheryl Bailey, and the way that your sound came across, particularly, David, when you were comping, and you were making this decision to make your chords really short, but they were all the same length. And they were like, and rhythmically, they fit exactly what you were doing. But the way you controlled not just your tone, but the shape of your note and your relative dynamics. And when you were able to set that as a pattern and then break from it as you changed your phrasing and changed whether or not you were playing the melody line or coming back to the harmonic parts. And I would like both of you to talk about a little bit of how you work on the physical aspects of your sound, if you wouldn't mind. Just a minute would be great. Abby, what about you?
Sound. Well, I just have to say the ends of the notes. That's like the the untraveled country that is like the where the magic is. It's the ends of the notes. It's the way they connect to the next note, and it's also the length you choose to make it. And it's exactly what you were saying about what David was doing. And for instance, there's the whole thing. Kim, you showed me the best example of this passage of tone concept, where one note leads to another, and what happens in that synapse, in that transition. And you had the best example of it, which is the Indiana Jones little movie clip where he's exchanging the golden idol for a sandbag. That's how two notes, and it has to be just right. And of course, he doesn't do a good enough job and suffers the consequences. And we have to all remember that. No. But
It gets tough, everyone.
Yeah.
It gets tough.
There
Full
could
music
be a
of your-
boulder if you don't
Yeah.
actually make the note completely, roll right into the next note.
It was a trap where the poison darts will start to come at you.
Exactly. And you might
Good
not
teaching
even-
technique.
Yeah, we learned that from the Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you should all watch that movie. It's a trap, and he has to take the golden idol and put the sandbag in, and if it can feel that there's been a displacement or a break in your tone, so to speak,
Yeah.
then all of the things come at
Yeah.
you.
And so he has to take off the idol and replace it with a sandbag seamlessly so that the surface underneath doesn't feel any change. And that's like switching notes. So that has to do, everyone thinks of the beginning of their note, but that has to do not just with the beginning of the next note, but with the end of the first note.
We're going to talk about breathing and relaxing when you play next. David, what about you? What's a minute of advice about working on your sound?
Yeah, well, I was just breathing and relaxing. I was actually just going to say, a lot of what affects people's tones detrimentally, if that's a word, is tension. And, particularly when you're in a solo and you're getting excited and more excited, and you start playing harder and things just start to fall apart sound-wise. So being relaxed and really focusing on the production of sound is really, we talked about this before, there's, and it's not something that I feel like a lot of jazz guitar players, I'll just talk about them in particular, have really worked on, to be honest with you. Some, it just happens naturally, but they're now, I've really been focusing on that personally and trying to convey that to students who I feel they come in and they just have a harsh, brittle type of sound. If that's what they're going for, that's cool. But 9 times out of 10, I don't think that's what they're really going for. They just don't know how to fix it. And again, it comes down to mechanics, pick the setup on the guitar, you really have to get rid of the buzz stuff going on and all that, but also the tension in your hands and how you're placing your hands on and striking the strings. And so, I still go through periods where I really have to analyze how I'm playing a passage and how that affects the sound, how I'm playing it, and really practicing scales, not just getting the notes right, but getting the sound right from one note to the other. Legato, staccato, that kind of stuff. And just real briefly, what you were saying about last week and comping and stuff. Everybody has a certain technical style to comping, I guess. So I tend to play more hybrid with a pick and fingers here, as opposed to, and sometimes I do kind of do a strumming thing, but I end up getting more of a kind of a rhythmic percussive type of thing going on, a little more precise type of thing, and especially in a duo situation where I want to kind of have a balance of a bass register with chords and stuff like that, and rhythm at the same time. So trying to create this like rhythmic kind of backdrop sort of thing that I've developed. And so that's a technique thing, and it's also just a thing I've heard over the years that I try to do when I'm accompanying someone.
David, how do you get the pick to balance with your fingers when you can't, like the pick is plastic, right? And your fingers, you
Mhm.
can feel the string. So how do you balance the weight so that you get a consistent sound across the chord voicing?
Just through, it's obviously two different directions. You're striking down as you're pulling up at the same time. So you just want to, I guess, practice doing that continually, while you're playing your chords, and compare that to doing it just with the hands.
Right.
Sometimes, occasionally, I'll drop the pick. I'm not good. I'm not good at doing this. Some people are able to cup the pick and do all fingers like that. I usually put it in my mouth and then use all, 5 fingers here. But a lot of times I just want to have that access, so I'll just use a, that kind of thing and try to get a balance.
Do you ever feel like the pick comes out too loud, or are you just able to use your ear to balance the weight?
Yeah, no, pretty much even at this point. I think, if it does, again, like the bass string is being hit with the pick, so I almost want that to be a little more powerful, and I'll juxtapose the bass line with the chord, so it'll be almost like not always played at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Um, Abby, my question for you about this is I think, like, to David's point, where sometimes jazz players don't think about their tone, maybe because they're always improvising and playing different things,
Hmm.
and he's using the scales to get them to play something consistent. How do
Hmm.
you help people who are used to interpreting music control their tone when they're improvising?
That's a good question. Um, I'm not sure it it's I'm not sure it's come up for me in exactly that way. I'm not sure that I've found someone who has good tone when they're playing something composed and they're interpreting it, and then they'd improvise and they wouldn't have good tone. I feel like it kind of carries over it, but I'm sure I'll be proven wrong. But
Right, because so I think that's a fear though, that's good to know, because I think what
yeah.
you're all both saying is when you really work on your tone, you internalize this.
And
And
one
it's
thing, one thing that occurs to me is when we were talking before, David was talking, you were talking about the evolution of it, and the fact that it's taking joy in the journey of it and in the repetition of it. And David, you were talking about balancing, the different uh, aspects of your right hand technique in terms of making one part out of a pick and your fingers and everything. If you think of the when students come into it, if they can, I mean, when you imagine the amount of repetitions and evolution over years that's made that a perfect mix and made it second nature, um, that's really that if we could all just enjoy that evolutionary process, I'm not sure it's entirely human nature. We probably have to try a little bit, but it feels really good, and it works best for the technique to actually think of it that way. Because if you think of it, if you're knitting or if you're making cookies and you want them all to be the same size, or if you're knitting, like same, or if you're like making little things, like let's say you were trying to make like snowman out of clay. If you made 100 of those little snowmen, balls, they would start to really look uniform, you know,
Mhm.
and you'd be in control of what you were doing. But it's that repetition. It's relaxed repetition. Or and
yeah, I think that's important because I think a lot of people have this. There's a bit of a myth that if you just have to be expressive and whatever comes through you,
Mhm.
and where there's a component of that, the idea of really knowing what you're doing and internalizing it and paying attention to how you're breathing and repeating things so that it internalizes into your system is the way to go, and that gives you this freedom to be creative.
Yeah.
Ian is with us, and I want to ask you, Ian. So Ian is the most recent alum in the group, and I want to hear about what you're thinking about, Ian. as you're listening to Abby
Yeah.
and Dave?
Both Abby and David, you both play pretty diverse styles just yourself. And then, of course, having the both of you here covers a lot. And as somebody who kind of came through Berklee playing at a lot of different styles and sort of bouncing around between things, I'm curious as to like what your experience has been teaching somebody who might not even fall under the styles that you yourself are sort of at home in. And like, I guess kind of bring it back to some of those like things that are consistent across styles. And like, how do you deal with somebody who might be like, well, I'm actually into like, Indian classical music or something or whatever it is, but like there's things obviously that you're still going to be a really good teacher for them.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, trying to think of some situations where that's been the case, and there's always some commonality there to find, let's say for example, like a Indian classical, I don't know, I'll pick out a modal tune, and we'll talk about modes and we'll talk about what we can play over this static kind of harmony thing going on, as opposed to all these crazy changes. I don't throw giant steps at every student, believe me. so, and very often that's what I concentrate on, are tunes that stylistically fit to what they might be into, jam band stuff or whatever it is, rock. I'll just try to do that, and yeah, and it's really just trying to find the commonality of music that crosses styles, and there's a lot of that, and I don't tell them, switch from the neck pickup to the bridge pickup. You're killing my ears. They want to have that, as long as the volume is controlled, they can have that sound and approach it from that viewpoint. But I think Ellington said there's only two types of music, good and bad, and those are the two categories I think about when I think about music. That's it. And styles are, what is when people say I don't like jazz, for example. That's the most funny statement I've ever heard, because it's like, what is jazz? It's not a style. It's an attitude. It's a open-ended attitude toward life and music, and it borrows from Eastern classical music and Western classical music and Negro spirituals and everything. All so it's all good. I love it when a student comes in with a totally different kind of approach and style of music. They usually come to me because they want to learn some aspect of jazz, so they're open to that. If they're not open to that, then it's probably not the best match, and we discovered that early on. But I try to keep it open-ended. I don't try to push any particular style on anybody, and just find the commonality. If that makes sense.
I'm thinking.
Well, like Abby, for example, like you taught Molly Tuttle, right? Who has a right hand that's, opposite
Okay.
from what you do, like she's got this heavy,
Right.
free floating flat picking technique. And yet you've,
Well, we had a good time. We did work on a Bach suite, and there were all kinds of fingering issues and slurs, and then thinking about everything. How do you finger a passage? That's that kind of thing with improvisation versus figuring out the best way to possibly play a particular line, to make it sound the way you want it to sound. And then we also she did for, I can't believe I remember all this. She did for one exam, we did the head to Donna Lee, because that's a whole other kind of style of notey passage. And she can certainly play the notey passages, So we just tried some other textures like that. And then also, and Swingfield is its own thing, its own aesthetic and thing. And then we also worked on, we did a lot of, in the ensemble, the Joni Mitchell things, but what we did is, like, one semester we didn't have a drummer, one semester we did, one semester we worked with upright bass. We had a lot of different, and we had banjo in there too. Really wonderful banjo player, Allison DeGroot. Anyway, so we put together the heads of the tunes in all kinds of different ways, and we did them literally, and then we didn't do them literally. And yeah, and that's what we worked on. I think that the phrasing stuff really always overarches. With the especially with people that are playing guitar parts with many voices, but even if it's just a melody line, it's often easy to forget, that a line can keep on going and keep on building until it reaches a conclusion, So, sometimes I have to think about that whenever I'm working on a piece. When you get past the technical stage of anything, where you're putting together Legos, and then you've got ball bearings all in a row, and then you kind of start to make it into a journey of different, and something that moves forward towards certain goals that make sense.
Yeah, I like what you referred to too, because I think another part of what you do so beautifully is you're an arranger. And so the openness that both of you are describing really feeds into what you see as possibilities in arranging. And hopefully that carries over to the students. And I think this all feeds into a question I want to make sure we have some time for, that has been asked about preparing for auditions. And I think that's obviously on everybody's mind that comes to all these webinars, and everyone we talk to is thinking about this. And I think just as an introduction of that, what we really want is for people to come into the audition and play something that they feel comfortable with. So we want you to play what you feel like, 5 minutes that shows the faculty who are listening to you that you feel comfortable with your playing at this stage, that things are fluid, that we can hear your phrasing, that we can hear your musicianship. Stay away from this feeling that I have to play a specific thing in order to get a great grade or a great number or a great opportunity for a scholarship, because it really comes down to how well and how deeply you play what you choose. And not about what you think someone wants to hear, because the truth is what they want to hear is you.
Right.
And when you play for 5 minutes, even if you think, oh, it's not impressive because it's not super fast or it's not really heady, we hear all the depth that you bring to it. That's what we hear. And I know that both Abby and David are going to back me up on this, and so is Damien, but it really is right away. And when you come in, the way you unpack your cable, if you have a cable, the way you set up your footstool, if you have a footstool, the way you just sit down with the guitar, you can already tell, because you have that presence that David was talking about earlier, where it's not an ego situation. You've chosen something that you could be relatively comfortable given the situation, that it's a high pressure situation, and that we hear you. And you're going to have a lot of time. The Berklee auditions are the longest auditions I've ever seen in any school I've been to. They're 20 minutes. And so you come in and everyone welcomes you who's there. It's usually like 2 or 3 people who are there, usually 2, a team of 2 faculty, and they may or may not play your instrument. And they're going to ask you to set up, give you a little time to set up. Bring the stuff that's easy to set up. Don't bring 10 pedals. You don't need 10 pedals. You're only playing for 5 minutes. We just want to hear your sound. Doesn't matter to us about the pedals. And, get your sound on the amp if you use an amp, and then play your piece, and then you're going to have some fun after that. Might not sound like fun right now when I'm describing it, but it's going to be fun, where they're going to ask you to read a little bit. We'll talk about reading. It's reading because you get it in advance when you arrive at the audition site. And Ian knows, we're going to tell you, we also have resources on our YouTube page so you can practice ahead of time for reading, and then they're going to ask you to improvise, and you can generally choose if you want to play over a mode or if you want to play over a blues. There's guidelines that we send out, that Damien's team sends out, so you know what that is. And then there's some ear training games, like clap back these rhythms, see if you can find this pitch on your instrument and play this series of notes that I'm going to play, like a playback. And honestly, all they want to see is, are you willing to dive in, especially if it's unfamiliar to you?
Hmm.
You know, are you willing, like, can you go with the flow? Because at Berklee, there's so many different things that we want you to get involved in, and if you're the type of person that you can get yourself to get the courage up to jump in and try things, then that tells us that you're going to be able to take real advantage of all the resources at Berklee. And so we're looking, you know, is it a good time for you? Is it a good fit for you to come to this kind of environment? And basically, we want you to come in, and we want to trick you into just being yourself by being there for a long time and having fun with you while you're there. It is actually a good time. I mean, um, Abby, what would you suggest to people who are preparing for auditions? Do you have specific advice, like maybe like
Um,
your 30-second pitch?
yeah, I mean, just one thing that comes to mind often is when you're in the audition, um, they may just keep asking you questions until you don't know something, just to kind of see how far you've gotten. So don't feel, if you get to a point where you don't know something that they've asked you, don't feel that that means you have done a bad job. Just, keep asking until, you don't know. And that's fine, because that may be what happens with everybody. They may just keep asking until they hit that point. Because they're trying to get a sense of exactly what you've done. And I think just what you were saying, Kim, about coming and letting us hear you, something that you're everyone is here because they're having a quest, a spirit quest with music, or some kind of quest with music, and anything that kind of hits you in that spot, anything that has drawn you to music and represents kind of what you do and who you feel like you are at that time. So
David, what do you think?
Gosh, you guys said it all pretty much. I think, yeah. I mean, yeah. Don't feel like you should know this and should know that. Like, just what you know at that point, and that's why you're coming here. And I've said that in auditions to students, like, oh, that's what you're here for, to learn. So, don't worry if you don't know about the modes. The most important thing is the music, that you bring at that audition, and just know that there's plenty of musicians out there who professionals, legends who couldn't read music and didn't know a mode if they came across one in the street, actually, because they don't think that way. They just learned music, and it's a language. They just may have been illiterate, so to speak. There's people who are brilliant orators that can't read a book. Okay, same thing. So just express yourself, find the best thing that that does that, a piece that you like. On a technical level, make sure, like, your guitar's tuned. You've got a good night of sleep, very important. And you have your pedals ready to go if you got pedals, and not fiddling around, because that just adds to the whole nervousness and everything of it. So just come in there, even rehearse your setup, just make things as smooth as possible, and go in there and really have a well rehearsed piece of music ready to go.
That's a great point. I had a teacher who had us every time we played, you had to come in and just like rehearse your setup 4 times,
hmm
and just do it over and over again and practice, like,
yeah,
like walking in
walking in.
and setting up and sitting down and play, and just see like what's the timing, like
Right.
what's too
It's not the
fast,
same
what's
as going to a gig, and setting up. We don't go to auditions every day, so it's a
right.
totally different thing. It's like you gotta be ready to do it.
Yeah, and like putting a recording device on when you do it, like gives that little edge of like, whoa, it really all, I know it sounds silly, but you hit record on your phone and it feels like you're
Yes.
really doing it. And I completely agree with everything you both said, and I want to say, that being said, if you have time before your audition, why not take a look at some of the reading? You know what I mean? Why not take a look at some of the resources that we have? And why not look at some of the modes? We have this book that's coming out in January through Berklee Press that's like a whole prep for our core curriculum on the guitar, which we call the proficiencies. Um, Go to your teacher in the meantime if you're auditioning before January, and or get in touch with us in the guitar department. We'll direct you to our resources and try some of those scales and modes out. Um, you're never going to lose by knowing more about the fretboard and knowing more about how to read music, because they're all tools. They're like tools of our trade, and that's why you're coming to school. So I would say dig in there as much as you can. And then when the time comes, David is right. On the day, you just have to have faith in what you're doing.
Yeah.
Before the day is a good time to go deep as you can, and just like don't feel insecure about writing to one of us. Write to me in the guitar department, say I was at the webinar or I heard you on YouTube, and I want to see where those resources are, because we're honestly really here to help. I mean, we really have this big guitar community, and you know, we're not hiding any of the resources. We want you to come and be a part of that. Damien, what do you think? Because you're starting to go all over the world now, almost as we speak. You're starting to travel. Are there things that you see just in this last few minutes that we have that you think would be helpful?
I think you need to think about coming to your audition and interview with a sense of authenticity. Really show us who you are as an aspiring artist. And like David and Abby said, it's, you know, nobody is perfect. We all have, you know, rough edges in some areas. So don't expect that you're just going to know everything that's asked of you. And it's not about that. It's about us getting to know you as an aspiring artist, and frankly, about you getting to know us and our approach to teaching. So I think that's my, you know, we hear all the time like, oh, should I play this kind of tune or should I play that kind of tune? The kind of tune you should play is the one that you love and that you know you can express really, really well, because that's what will come through to the audition team, regardless of style of music.
Yep.
So
That's
just
right.
think through that.
We don't have an audition repertoire list.
No, we do not.
You might be the
Deliberate.
only school in the world that does not have one, because
Right.
you create that, and that's and that is, it's not a trap. It's an invitation, right? So in the last couple of minutes, before we sign off today, David, do you have any final thoughts or advice for the students listening?
You know, be open-minded to music, to sound, and don't think in categories. You know, again, like I said, there's two categories: good and bad music, and that's all subjective. So, you know, I just feel like, you know, in this world today, we're too in our own camps, right? So, you know, we need to move back to more of a cohesive, you know, when I grew up, like I was saying earlier in the beginning, like, you know, 70s radio, you know, where you would hear a fusion piece and a rock piece and a jazz piece on the same radio station, you know, just be open-minded. You're here to discover, you know, and just have your ears wide open, and, you know, and to creativity, and that's what we're here for, to discover new things. So just be open-minded.
I think that's a beautiful thought to end on. And thank you, David Gilmore. Thank you, Abby Aronson Zoscher. Thank you, Ian Steed. And thanks, Damien Bracken. Thank you all for being here. And we hope that we see you soon.
Thank you, Kim.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks everybody.
And take care.
Ciao. Bye-bye.